Before we begin, my friend Mac and I have launched a Kickstarter for a new web series called Typecast, a comedy drama about actors who are also monsters. Please go to tinyurl.com/typecastks to see the proof of concept and to learn more. There's a general sentiment these days that remakes happen too often, that there are no original ideas in the entertainment industry anymore, that remakes and reboots are inherently devoid of creative merit. And yes, TV and film have been saturated with milquetoast retreads of old TV shows and reboots that don't particularly do anything interesting, which is a problem when you're trying to use these things to jumpstart a shared universe film franchise. Looks like we won't be getting that Bride of Frankenstein remake anytime soon. But for every poorly judged remake of a cinematic classic, there's an example of something wonderful built on the bones of something that came before. For every TV show that attempts to take something a bit naff and resurrect it into something watchable, there's another that succeeds at that mission statement 1,000-fold. If you want a truly glaring example of the sort of cognitive dissonance people display when it comes to remakes and reboots, I once had a discussion about the creative merits of reboots with someone who was adamant that they were all terrible with zero exceptions while we were stood in line to get Billie Piper's autograph at a Doctor Who convention. The accepted wisdom among the people is that remakes, reboots and revivals are bad more often than not, and I'm firmly of the belief that the accepted wisdom and the people who espouse that wisdom are wrong. Human beings have been telling and retelling stories since we first started telling stories. The Scrubs episode My Way or the Highway borrows elements from West Side Story, which is a retelling of Romeo and Juliet, which was itself based on the tragical history of Romeus and Juliet, a narrative poem by Arthur Brooke that was first published over 40 years before the first performance of Shakespeare's play. By that metric, every reboot, every remake, every revival that's ever been made has already justified its existence. With one exception. See, usually when you're doing a remake, you're trying to find a new way to tell an old story. You're taking something that already exists and you're reinterpreting it or reimagining it. But there exists a movie that is a shot-for-shot, beat-for-beat, line-for-line remake of the original. That film, of course, is the 1998 remake of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. No, we're not doing that. No, I can't do that. Mikey's a genius. His ability to break down a movie is intimidatingly brilliant. I mean, the guy was nominated for an Emmy, for Christ's sake. I, on the other hand, had my quarterly review at my day job last week and got needs improvement. And besides, this is not a joyful breakdown of a movie. This isn't a video about the positives of this film. You aren't going to come away from this video with a renewed appreciation of a misunderstood classic, but maybe you'll come away from it with a deeper understanding of how it came to exist and why it doesn't quite work.
If it don't gel, it ain't jello.
Yeah, that's more or less what I was going to say, so yeah, thanks, William H. Macy. So, for those who don't know, Psycho is a 1998 remake of the seminal Hitchcock psychological horror from 1960 about a masturbating pervert. Wait, no. Hitchcock's Psycho is about a woman, Marion Crane, who steals a large sum of money from her employers and then makes the mistake of stopping at the Bates Motel, where she is treated to sandwiches by Norman Bates before being promptly murdered. Fair play to Norman, most murderers don't bother catering. What follows is the complete collapse of Bates's own world as the investigation into Marion's disappearance pokes holes into the world that Bates has crafted for himself following his murder of his own mother 10 years prior and his attempt to psychologically erase the crime from his own life in the decade since. And that's only scratching the surface of the film's narrative. This is a movie about jealousy, rage, about crimes of passion, and at its core, duality. The remake was directed by Gus Van Sant, seen here playing Yoshi Safari on the Super Scope, who'd spent years lobbying Universal to allow him to remake the Hitchcock classic. But it wasn't until the phenomenal success of Good Will Hunting that Universal acquiesced. And who can blame them? Good Will Hunting made somewhere in the region of infinity dollars at the box office on a budget of $17 and a box of fake beards, and it won 2 Oscars, including Best Supporting Actor and Best Original Screenplay. Now, it was nominated for Best Director, didn't win. And you're about to learn why. Van Sant's Psycho aims to recreate the original movie as faithfully as possible, updated for modern sensibilities with a cast of then current big names including Julianne Moore, William H. Macy, and Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates, which, Yeah, I'm not even going to touch that one. He used Joseph Stefano's original screenplay, set up shots almost identically to the way Hitchcock's in the original, and even referred to a copy of the original film on set. The intent was clear. He wasn't so much remaking Psycho as he was making Psycho again. On paper, this seems like a good compromise for people who don't like remakes. It sticks to the source material, just giving things a bit of a spit and polish to bring things up to a contemporary, modern 1998 setting. Of course, there are two problems with that. Firstly, there's already a shot-for-shot version of Psycho. It's called Psycho, and it was released in 1960. Secondly, Gus Van Sant couldn't direct his way out of a Trader Joe's parking lot. Part of the problem is that by being an act of mimicry, by sticking so close to the original, Van Sant largely misses what makes it work so well in the first place. Anyone who's seen the original Psycho knows that this is a film with layers. On the surface, yes, you can probably appreciate it as being a movie about a bloke what dressed up as his dead mum and done a murder on a woman, but if that's all you're going to get out of it, then you're going to miss out on a whole heap of actual, certified genius. Hitchcock makes very careful use of mirrors and reflections in Psycho. Mirrors represent duality. For Marion, who at the beginning of the movie is seen getting made up in an unseen mirror, but who is constantly and consistently seen reflected in mirrors and surfaces once she's made the decision to steal her boss's money, the mirrors represent her duality, the aspect of herself that has committed a crime she is so desperate to hide from her employer, from the police, from the car dealer, and eventually from Norman. Norman is also seen reflected throughout his initial scenes with Marion, the first visual clue to the audience that he may well be hiding something himself. For Norman, they represent his dual personality, the side that is slightly awkward but otherwise charming, and the side that is a stabby, murdery cross-dresser and, oh look, blood. Lovely. Hitchcock makes these choices very deliberately, whereas Van Sant makes these choices because Hitchcock made them. In fact, Van Sant didn't make these choices at all, and the reality is that some of his shots are framed almost identically, setting up the scene but not quite capturing the intent of the shot from the original. You get the impression that he doesn't understand why shots are framed the way that they are, just that they have to be that way because that's how they were framed in the original. They're imprecise copies rather than careful replicas. At that point it stops being artistry and starts being mimicry, which is deplorable, it's despicable, and frankly, I would never even dream of etc. I'm going to cut to the thing I'm copying.
It's a reference joke, love.
When the effort has been made to make this film look so much like the original, the few changes made stick out like a porg in a basket of cats. There are a handful of minor changes to dialogue in the movie, so many small cuts and tweaks, but there are also additions that recontextualize certain moments in the story. We've already spoken about one, that's not dwell on this for too long, but this is followed later in the movie by a moment where Marion's sister Lila finds pornography in Norman's bedroom. This replaces a similar moment in the original when Lila finds a book with a blank cover and contents that we as the viewer aren't allowed to see but that clearly do her a concern. In Van Sant's Psycho, Norman Bates' sexual psychoses are front and center and are a very visible motivator for his crimes. This is something that's merely hinted at in the original, and that makes it approximately 17,000% creepier. You can argue that the downplaying of the sexual element in the original is down to the standards of the time, and that's partially true. The film was made as the influence of the motion picture production code was beginning to wane, though distributors Paramount Pictures still had objections to what it deemed to be, and I'm quoting directly here, too repulsive. But even so, Hitchcock's original pushed boundaries for what was considered acceptable in early 1960s cinema and arguably birthed a genre that gave us all of these delightful characters. Van Sant's Psycho, on the other hand, is just imitation, and while that may be the sincerest form of flattery, the result is an incredibly insincere piece of cinema. You can't recreate a cinematic masterpiece shot for shot without truly understanding what makes those shots actually work, and it's so clear that everybody saw this except for Van Sant. A behind-the-scenes documentary about the movie included on the Blu-ray that looks to have aired around the time the movie was released opens with shot after shot of people saying that the movie can't work. I mean, look at this.
They're gonna get crucified.
Why wouldn't they want to redo that one?
If people want to see a Hitchcock film, then they should go back and watch the original Psycho.
You do not try to remake perfection.
When a tie-in documentary designed to promote a remake starts off with people saying it can't possibly work, maybe that's a bad sign. In the end, the 1998 remake of Psycho doesn't work. It doesn't justify its existence. It doesn't stand out in any way. It isn't trying to tell us anything. It isn't trying to do anything new. And if you're not going to do anything new, why bother remaking Psycho for the 90s in the first place? It's Van Sant playing dress up, pretending he's capable of modernizing a classic by a genre master, when the reality is that the entire endeavor is just masturbatory. No, I said I'd be doing the Haunted Mansion, but I couldn't resist. This was originally going to be the Halloween episode, and things kind of got on top of me. Don't worry, PortsCenter is still a show about video games, and next time we will be doing the Haunted Mansion on the Game Boy Color. And then eventually I'll get around to Daikatana and Street Fighter 2. But until then, thanks for watching. Do please subscribe to FilmJoy, and I'll be back next time with an actual video game. Thank you for indulging me in this particular episode. You guys rock. Goodbye for now.